Tariffs, tariffs, tariffs. Donald Trump's new favourite word in the English language. He said he was going to do it. He said he was going to basically whack tariffs on everyone he says has been using and abusing American kindness as the world's biggest economy. A lot of countries have been very protectionist against America, thinking we can't compete with them, so we better put up barriers to trade. And Donald Trump has said enough is enough. If you don't let us sell our stuff in your country without tariffs and without tariff barriers, we are going to do the same to you. We are going to block you from exporting to what is probably one of the hungriest, greediest markets on the planet. And you kind of think to yourself, well, fair play, fair enough, why not? But what sort of effect is this going to have on the global economy? Is it going to overheat things and create hyperinflation? What about us with our 10% tariffs? Apparently, we need to get on with getting on and forging a very good trade deal with America, or those tariffs are set to stay. Well, let's speak to Liam Halligan, my favourite economist of them all, columnist at The Telegraph and author of When the Facts Change Substack. Hello, Liam.
Alex, good to see you. I'm liking the new glasses.
Oh, do you know what? I'm feeling a bit tired today. Every now and then I put my bins on just to make myself look more intelligent so my eyes don't look like proverbial holes in the snow. Right, let's talk about tariff land. I did wrote a little piece myself on my own Substack about this the other day and what Trump's strategy might be behind whacking all of these tariffs up. Is it working, though? Are things going according to plan? Because the markets are sort of looking at Trump going, he's flip-flopping a lot. He put all these tariffs up against the world. He's now deciding he might have to freeze them or pause that sort of activity other than when it comes to China. What is going on?
Well, I do think there's definitely a strategy. It's not right just to say that Trump is bonkers, as a lot of, columnists in the UK want to say. There's a lot of sort of people that instinctively don't like America very much and absolutely don't like Trump. There's definitely a strategy, and the strategy is to try and correct a situation where, and it's true, tariffs against America, particularly from the European Union and China, have been much higher than the tariffs that America has imposed on when importing goods from overseas, and he wants to correct that. He also wants to weaken the dollar. Why would he want to weaken the dollar? Because that makes US exports more competitive, and that will help him to rebuild American manufacturing. The American heartlands were very much abandoned by both Democrats and Republicans in the 90s and 2000s. It was all about Wall Street, it was all about the financiers, and he wants to rebuild that manufacturing capacity, those blue-collar jobs that gave a lot of American people such good lives back in the day. But even though he's got a strategy, and it is a strategy, his implementation of it has been, extremely punchy, and also the markets are pushing back. So I do think he blinked. I don't buy this spin that the 90-day moratorium on the reciprocal tariffs, the much higher tariffs above 10%, was in the plan. I don't buy that. I don't buy the fact that he wasn't spooked by this huge spike in what we call US Treasury yields, costs of government borrowing for the US, which of course impact borrowing costs across the Western world. So I do think he has been unsettled by financial markets. I do think people around him, not least Treasury Secretary Bessent, have convinced him to impose this moratorium. But that doesn't mean there isn't a plan. There is a plan, but it's so complicated and it's so ambitious that it's going to be, as we say in economics, it's going to be iterative. You get there bit by bit. You don't eat the elephant in one big gulp. So a lot of people just say he's mad. He's not mad at all. He's just extremely ambitious, and he's being buffeted by a massive pushback from global financial markets.
I mean, this is it. He is a bullish man. He is a forceful man. And one might say, well, actually, in the first instance, there is going to be short-term pain. We will see price rises if tariffs are being put on to goods that have been imported before various businesses can be onshored, before big companies who can afford to make the move go, well, I may as well now manufacture X, Y, and Z over in America, creating those blue-collar and grey-collar jobs, reindustrialising elements of the Rust Belt. But what's going to be the impact on us? Why are we facing 10% tariffs? My understanding is it's because of a lot of legacy alignment with good old Brussels.
It's because he's put tariffs on 10% across the board to show that he's serious. It could, of course, been a lot higher for the UK because we do have some legacy tariffs that were imposed when we were members of the European Union, and our useless politicians haven't got rid of those tariffs, even though they end up protecting products that we don't even make. So the tariffs, the legacy tariffs from the European Union, all they do is make life more expensive for our consumers. They're completely mad. But look, I genuinely think for all the buffeting and the squalls and the thrills and spills on global markets, and look, I don't underestimate how difficult they're making life for people if you're trying to buy or sell a house at the moment, if you're a business trying to refinance. I mean, this stuff is really, really difficult. It feels like the sort of run up to 2008. It feels like, a rerun of the mad Eurozone crisis that we were all told could never happen, and then it happened in 2010 and 2011. This stuff really does hurt. But aside from that, I do think the UK's genuinely got an opportunity. Why? Because Trump is very soon going to need to show that his policy of throwing everything up in the air is actually bearing fruit. And the fruit will be with trade deals with major countries that he can point to his opponents, both in his own party and elsewhere in Congress across the aisle, and the skeptical American public who aren't MAGA supporters, though a lot are, of course. And I would say that if he can say to America and the world, hey, look, I just did a trade deal with the Brits. The Brits have been in the European Union for decades. They never had a trade deal with the US. The EU hasn't got a trade deal with the US. I just did a trade deal with the Brits. Who wants some? Who wants some more? So I actually think this isn't complete idle speculation. I actually think there is a chance that a trade deal with the UK, and of course it will be controversial, and of course there'll be endless nonsense talked about chlorinated chicken. I lived in the States for years, ate a lot of chicken. I'm fine. I'm not a chicken. There's chlorine in the salad that we eat. There's whole
chlorine in the water,
total
crying out loud.
It will be controversial, but if we can do a trade deal with the US, and I think he may be up for it, then that could completely change the world's view of what he's actually doing.
But this is the thing, he is using tariffs as a geopolitical lever as well, isn't he? He's using it to try and put China back in a box. I mean, looking at what's going on in Ukraine and finding Chinese fingerprints on dual-use goods that have ended up in Russian weapons. About a quarter of them have come from China. Talk now of there actually being Chinese boots on the ground in Ukraine on the Russian side.
China are all over Ukraine. China are all over Ukraine, and they have been since the very beginning. We just haven't wanted to talk about it. China are also massively involved with attempts to do a peace deal in Ukraine, but again, we just don't want to talk about it. But it's true.
But this is it. He is using tariffs also as a geopolitical device, saying, whose side are you on? China's side or my side? And he's saying to Sir Keir Starmer, essentially, because what I've heard, I do a lot of American media, is one of the conditions of any trade deal with the UK will be making sure that we have free speech. We know that the White House is deeply concerned about the state of affairs in Brussels. They're deeply worried about what they see as an act of self-harm happening across governments in Europe. And they're basically saying, look, your job is to be the vanguards of Western civilization. Get on with it. Step up to the plate. Make sure that you put your own people first. And I get the impression that soon enough, Sir Keir Starmer is going to be in the very difficult position of having to decide whether he's an Atlanticist or whether he does want ever closer ties with the European Union.
It would certainly be a real irony if, a North London lawyer who came into politics in 2015 and spent the first, 5 or 6 years in Parliament trying to stop Brexit every day of his life. He was the flag bearer of all that disgraceful parliamentary chicanery to try and stop a referendum from being implemented before it even, reversing it before it had even been allowed to take effect. It would have been completely outrageous. And now it may be that he's going to stand next to Trump, an arch advocate of Brexit, of course, and sign a trade deal with the US that would have been impossible when we were in the European Union. I think his head's going to explode. And as for Ed Davey, I think he's going to just blow up completely with outrage and anger. But look, of course, Trump is trying to use tariffs as a geopolitical weapon. And I've said that there is some method in his madness, and there is. I've also said, yes, he definitely blinked in the face of pushback from financial markets, particularly bond markets, over the last 36, 48 hours. But look, I do think he's miscalculating in a very, very specific way, Alex. 1945, the US was the leader of the free world. It had the moral rectitude to do that because it was on the right side of the Second World War. All right, they came pretty late, but they got there in the end, right? And so the US was able to carry the world as the kind of torchbearer of a new world order. The same, though less understood but still relevant, in the mid-80s there was something called the Plaza Accord, where the US got together the big economies of the world, mainly the G7 back then, and said, look, the dollar's too high. All of you are demanding the dollar. You're all storing your reserves in the dollar. This is killing our industry. We want you guys to allow your currencies to go up against the dollar so we become more competitive again. And the rest of the world went, fair dues, you're America, we'll do that for you, right?
Yeah.
Trump is now betting, when he's only got a 4-year term, of course he can't come back because it's his second term, the congressional midterms, and he's got a tiny little majority in the House of Representatives, are going to be campaigning soon. He is trying to do all this in 4 years, right? At a time when America does not have the kind of moral, it doesn't generate the kind of moral loyalty across the world that it used to, not just in the Western world.
Right.
But there's now another whole part of the world, the global south. You know, it's the BRIC economies, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. The economies together are bigger than the G7.
Right. And talking tough against
Trump
Russia,
really
for
be the
instance,
global leader?
something
I'm
we're
not sure he
waiting
can.
for him to do.
I'm not sure he can.
Liam, thank you ever so much. We've got to go to a break now. Fascinating as always, speaking to Liam Halligan. He's the one man on planet Earth that makes economics interesting and understandable. But that is a feat in itself.